Hello to our captive and wonderful audience, and welcome back to Health Without the System podcast. I'm Dr. Tim Scott with Rixa Health, and this is my wife, Mia.
Hi guys, my name is Mia Scott, and I'm a nurse practitioner here with Rixa Health. So today's episode is actually going to be about the food pyramid, and it's not.
What did we title it? Are we going to title it what we said?
Yeah, maybe we might have to bleep some things out, but
Okay.
Our food pyramid is really not what we think it is. And why does this matter? Well, I'm just going to give you just a quick little backstory that Tim and I, we have our practice here, Rixa Health. We see weight management patients every single day, and that not just weight management, lifestyle, how to better your life, how to lower your toxic load, how to eat appropriately. Now, the food pyramid is obviously recommended by a lot of doctors, and it's not what you think. So
It's kind of just like second nature. So, I mean, I can speak to the fact I went to medical school and we did not have many nutrition classes. This is a really cool thing. You can ask a lot of doctors about, well, it's not cool, it's sad. You can ask a lot of doctors about this. How many nutrition classes did you have in medical school? They're probably going to tell you 0, maybe 1, maybe a couple hours. And that definitely fits my bill. And I'm an osteopathic physician where we do take more of a holistic approach. Very little nutrition training. And so when I was told, the food pyramid, I'm like, okay, it is what it is. The food pyramid it is.
Yep. And when I was even doing my clinicals during my schooling, it would be in the primary cares off. Every single room had a diagram of the food pyramid. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. That big old grains is at the bottom. Of course, the bottom you're eating the most of. It works your way to the top to some of your fats, actually, which is very ironic as we get to the story of the food pyramid. And I'm going to apologize right now. I'm going to be looking down at my laptop. This is not a memorized story. However, feel free, please do your own research and look this up. The story is mind-blowing. It is very true and valid, and I cannot even believe that we're still functioning on the same food pyramid that we are today. Did you want to say anything?
No, I was just going to say, I can't wait to hear this. Mia is a little bit more involved in this story than me. She'll probably be talking more about it today, but I will be here for support.
That's because it probably teeters on that conspiracy theory line, and I'm trying to, get my husband on board with the conspiracy theory. So
yeah, what I do like your quote. I say it all the time. What's the difference between a conspiracy theorist and a normal person?
6 months.
Yeah.
So, all right. So anyway, the true history behind the food pyramid. This is a big story of corruption, lobbying, and the big industry influence. So as you know, the food pyramid, it has shaped our dietary recommendations for years, since 1970. So 55 plus years. It's been in our system. It started in Sweden. They had a much better food pyramid than we did. They started out the right way, looking at whole foods and, you're plant predominant and healthy, non-toxic, less ingredients, just a solid food pyramid. Then, of course, it comes to the US and we have to mess things up. So most people actually don't realize that the big tobacco played a major role in shaping the modern food, and this story is wild on how this actually came into fruition. So the original food pyramid, like I said, it's not what we got. This originated in Sweden in the 1970s, and then when it came to us, government adapted the model, and then by the late 1970s, early 80s, it was a completely different structure, and we will go over how that happened.
Yeah, I think, in Sweden in the 70s, it probably started out pretty decent. I mean, they did have the base, the middle, and the top. Your base was staples, bread, grains, potatoes. Your middle was dairy and protein. And the top, fruits, vegetables, and what they considered luxury foods, some of the other meats and stuff. And then the U.S. said, hey, that's a great idea. But before it ever hit the shelves, it's like who all could get their grubby hands, right?
Exactly. And then that's how we talk about history. So you guys will learn that there are many key players involved that are super important to this story. And when I say story, I'm not saying this is just some folktale, this is true. And it's insane that we have not changed the way that we look at the food pyramid. So the main players involved, the USDA, that's the United States Department of Agriculture, they had a major focus on shifting the agricultural profits into this human health consumption of the food pyramid. Then grain and processed food corporations came in. So you got your General Mills, Kellogg's, the Cargill, and that comes into play when who owns those grain processes. We'll get to there. And then sugar industry. You had the massive sugar industry that actually paid off scientists to shift blame away from sugar and then focus more on fats. Once again, I will absolutely circle back on how that was crucial in our food pyramid. And then
you've already said they've paid scientists.
Yeah, it gets better. Yeah. And by better, I mean worse. So Big Pharma was also involved. Of course, unfortunately, it's not really an opinion. They do make millions, billions of dollars on sick patients. And this food pyramid absolutely shows that it's not in the consumer's best interest. So let's dive into the story time. So the tobacco industry and the hidden influence on the food. Why did the tobacco industry have such a big pull on this food pyramid? So like I said, in about the 1960s and 70s, this is where at the same time you had this was about 1980 to 1985, the owner of the Marlboro who made the cigarettes, the Philip Morris, he was getting major heat at this time because decades gone by with cigarette use, they were literally recommending it to patients for weight loss. And then they started to realize there's actually kind of an issue with these cigarettes.
Yeah, I think it was the early 1970s that they actually stopped banning them, or that you couldn't do cigarette ads on TV anymore.
Yeah.
And then that's when that revolution was sort of happening, and people were like, okay, you've been telling us for years that cigarettes okay. Doctors have been telling us, go ahead and smoke cigarettes.
Good for your brain health.
Yeah,
good
lose
for
weight,
weight,
having some anxiety. Yeah. And, you can also talk about that with benzodiazepines later and multiple other drugs. But for now, let's just stick with this story. Sorry, I'm getting down the...
So for all of you people, medical people who are immediately like, trust the science, we actually shouldn't do that too much because this is what science has led us, and we'll get into that. So anyway, this tobacco guy who made billions of dollars off of, making people sick with cigarettes, this was coming out. He was getting rapid heat saying, this is actually toxic. We should probably not do this. So he needed a loop out. He had about 2,000 scientists that he was employing to do studies. And of course, it was suppressing everything that was bad. He was coming out with the scientist studies saying that cigarettes were good for you. Other people were doing different research. This is how he caught the heat. So nonetheless, he said, I have this entire crew. I need to make a move here because the cigarettes are going to be plummeting and not the way that I want to go because now my dishonesty is coming out. So what did he do? In 1985, he became the largest food company in America. He bought up and these are all the ones that General Mills, Post Cereals, Kool-Aid, Jell-O, Oscar Mayer, Maxwell House Coffee, Kraft. The list goes on and on. He bought every single major food company because he saw that his cigarettes were going to plummet. So this was a huge conflict of interest, obviously. These were companies that were controlled by this highly processed food. And he also owned the scientist narrative on the health. So he took all 2,000 of his scientists that were helping him suppress the evidence for how cigarettes were bad for you.
Yeah.
And then he pulled them into the wellness world and said, now I need you to make this food as addictive, and we need to pull in all of these lobbying and pull on these ag cultures and multi-billion-dollar industries so we can promote this food pyramid.
Yeah. And so, just to kind of recap for a minute, what you're mentioning is definitely true. This is all out there for people to look up, but we know that for a long time, cigarettes were touted as safe. And the reason for that was because science, right? There were scientists doing these studies, publishing these studies. But as I argue, when anybody says trust the science and data can be manipulated. You can do a study over and over again until you get the results that you want, and then you can throw away the last 9 and keep the one good one that showed what you wanted. You can change your endpoints throughout the study. You're not supposed to. That's not good science, but it certainly didn't stop people in certain other eras of medicine. I'm avoiding specifics there on purpose because I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole. But the point of this is that science in and of itself should absolutely be questioned because it can be manipulated, it can be bought, and like Mia is saying, it can absolutely influence an entire culture of people. So you had these cigarette people who told us it was good for a long time. Now all of a sudden, independent studies are getting out there. We know it's bad. So now Philip Morris, other tobacco manufacturers decide, let's shift focus. Let's go to this industry. Let's buy up all these food companies. Let's put our scientists in there. And what she said, or what she mentioned, is they actually, before they were even doing the research, they're actually trying to develop ways to make food as addictive as cigarettes. They basically said, take what we know about what's addictive about cigarettes and put it in food, and let's figure it out.
Which is how they came up with these studies. So, of course, they started marketing this low-fat diets or low-fat, how that became a fad. And so he started to heavily market low-fat products. Why? Because he could then replace the fat, the natural fats, with the corn, the sugars, and the things that he was getting money from these massive lobbying industries, like Big Ag and the sugar industry and things of that nature. So he had his scientists tweak the data to show that low fat was better and sugar was okay. Sugar was not the bad guy. It was the fats. That way he could get these multi-billion-dollar industries into the food pyramid. So by removing fat, of course, we know that removing natural fats, and I mean your good fats, not your seed oils, your good fats, that makes things less palatable. So in order to replace that, he had to add in the different alternatives, your high sugar, your processed seed oils, things
Salt.
that are, and additives that have been proven to be addictive because, of course, course, these processed foods, they took all of his scientists that were focusing on the cigarettes and they said, make this food addictive. And that's what they did. So he had this playbook that he was basically manipulating not only the science, which they applied to the food, but was changing the way that we look at fats and sugars and everything in the system.
And I think another thing to remember is to pull something like this off, you need a lot of different things on board. So you've mentioned, Washington, D.C. There are lobbyists involved in this, right? You need people lobbying congressmen. You need bills. You need certain things to be allowed in food. You need the FDA to have this category called generally recognized as safe, so you can put in all of these ingredients that have absolutely no testing. You need media. So this is around the time in the 80s is when media really started to come to life. News outlets were a big thing. People were watching the 6 o'clock news every night. You get a story on there about how, all of a sudden, fats are bad in your diet, and now you got to get these low fat foods. And that's the door. That's how they get in. And then things can just explode from there.
Yeah, so he used a few different tactics. Like I said, one of them was shifting the blame from sugar to then fat. So the sugar industry paid Harvard scientists in 1960s, starting in the 1960s, to falsely blame saturated fat for heart disease. So they said, no, it's your grass-fed butter and your steak off your farm that's causing your heart attack. It's not the pounds of sugar that you're eating. So they were able to manipulate the data to show that sugar was not the problem. It was the fats. Then you have this massive spike in low-fat diets. Well, what does low-fat do in your brain of mental health, of endocrine disruptors, of it stabilizes your hormones? Now you have females, you have infertility issues. That is an entire systemic effect that happened by just making things low fat. So they paid the scientists, got the sugar back into basically saying it's okay. And then the same corrupt nutrition scientists shaped the USDA food pyramid. And that started in our legit food pyramid that we started in 1992. So this was over years of once the Sweden kind of launched theirs. And then they started to dig into the science, paid off all of these industries. And then they were able to get our USDA approved food pyramid.
The 1992 USDA approved food pyramid was already heavily manipulated over the past decade by the time it ever got announced.
And mind you, like I said, if you look at the food pyramid, it is promoting grains and processed food over nutrient-dense foods. So that was their one tactic. And then the second tactic was, of course, promote healthy processed foods. So if you guys remember, when they started to do light cigarettes are better for you, try the light cigarettes, they're healthier. So just like that, they were marketed as healthier than big food industry, which, like I said, it's the same person who developed the cigarette company, came out and said low fat, heart healthy, with these ultra processed high sugar foods, which as we now know is absolutely not healthy, yet nothing has changed with our food pyramid. The other thing that they did was had their fraud scientists. So they had their entire scientific team. And the Tobacco and Food Corporation's funded research. Like I said, they got government agencies involved. This is where that corruption happens. Newsflash, the government is not really on our side for those listening. And then they ensured that low fat was going to be pushed and not the sugars. So then you had that tactic.
It's really, when you start to look at it, it's almost like a mafia, like a cult. You get these people at the top who then they get people underneath them who believe the cause. And, money is powerful. Money can definitely make people believe in a certain thing. And I think the thing to remember is while there's definitely deceitful behavior, because people like me, especially when you're first hearing this, you say it simply can't be true that this entire organization of people that you're talking tens of thousands of people, thousands of scientists at this time are all out to manipulate us for money. And the answer to that is you're absolutely right. There's generally a few bad people at the top or pulling strings behind the scenes. What they present to other people are, different and completely inaccurate descriptions of what they're doing, of the consequences of their actions. They might just tell you, hey, study this chemical and tell me how to make that addictive in food. Maybe they tell you we're going to put it in apples so that we make kids get addicted to apples, right? You don't know what these people are being told. So it's not as far-fetched when you understand that there's really a few bad players or a few sort of the evil geniuses that get the ball rolling. And then they get otherwise good people who probably have good intentions who are just doing their job. They're reporting to work and they're studying what they're told to study and building a pyramid they're told to build.
And mind you, these are scientists that you tell them to do a job. And if you don't like the outcome, you can go back to that scientist and say, why don't we take out this portion of it? Why don't we change the age of this? And you can tweak data and say, now repeat the study. And then you get that study back and you're like, I still don't like that.
Absolutely. And then if you get a scientist who says, no, I can't do that, that's going to manipulate it too much, you can now take this data to a new scientist and say, hey, replicate this study, but I don't want this or this in it. So again, science can be very heavily manipulated and done so many times before you see a paper or results.
Yeah, mind you that he pretty much owned the 2,000 scientists that were working for him. So clearly studies were going to go in his favor.
If I could real quick, let me interject. This is where you can talk about pharmaceutical companies, and this happens to this day. Pharmaceutical companies will have multiple labs that they employ as sort of like their initial, before it even gets to human studies, labs all over the country. Imagine 5 universities. Let's just say 2 universities, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. You start the studies at University A on the East Coast. You get some results you like, some results you don't like. At this point, maybe they're done. They're like, no, we can't take this any further. We can't manipulate it anymore and still keep the integrity of the study. Pharmaceutical company can take that and say, okay, thank you, University A, we're done with you. They can take it to University B and tell them absolutely nothing about what's been done from University A, present maybe an entirely different concept, theory, or anything, and ask them to do the data that they want. And this is why sometimes you'll get, drugs that you just kind of wonder, like, there's 400 side effects and any real or minimal effect. This is why, because it can just be so heavily manipulated, as well as the endpoints and what you're actually trying to achieve. And there's one last thing, and I'm not going to get into this today, but there's relative risk and absolute risk when it comes to different pharmaceuticals. And I think that was actually applied to some of the food studies.
Yeah. So bottom line, food industry, it used the same addictive science that they used in the tobacco world. They brought that and they made this massive food pyramid that would benefit these multi-billion-dollar industries. And what happened? What happened after that? So the food pyramid, like I said, when it launched, the obesity rate at that time was about 13%. The diabetic rate, the population that had diabetes, was under 1%. So, and this is from after the food pyramid started. From 1992 to 2020, the overweight or obese population today went from 13% to 74%. And the diabetics that was under 1% is 38% for pre-diabetics and 11% for diabetics. And I think the diabetic is higher than that, than 11%.
Yeah, and to take that stat even one step further, when you look at what is characterized as truly metabolically healthy, like no metabolic abnormalities, it's actually, I believe, 6% of the U.S. population that falls in that category. And they look at different markers like waist circumference, HDL, probably triglycerides. There's, a few of the, like your typical metabolic syndrome markers, but 6% of the U.S. population falls in that category. And I mean, that's just a shame. And it all stems from this.
And that's who's tested. And then, of course, Big Pharma is involved. Why? Because look how much money they are making. The chronic disease is still to this day. I'm not talking like this is history. Like, this is now. We have never been so sick and near deadly. Yes, we might be like our longevity, like sure, our age, whatever, we might be living a year or two longer, but the quality of lifespan is just not.
We have
health
that
span. I'm sorry, health span.
I was just going to say we have that discussion a lot. Health span versus lifespan, right? Lifespan is the years alive. Health span are the years active and healthy, doing what you love. In the United States, there's about an 11-year difference there. So Americans live to about 77, but our health span is 66 years old, meaning once we hit 66, the majority of Americans aren't able to do the things they love anymore.
Yep.
You can't do pickleball anymore. You can't go play golf because your knee hurts, your back hurts, you're too overweight. And that all of this, it's very real. And like Mia said, chronic disease, I mean, it really is truly an industry. When you have a medical system that is incentivized on quantity and not quality, we are a system that gets paid based on the amount of patients we see, the amount of drugs we prescribe. We are not paid on the outcome of these patients, on the quality of our patients' lives or the quality of time we spend with them. And that's just a simple fact. And that's what this leads to. This is money. The sicker you are, if you're on 4 drugs or more, you are essentially a cash cow to your insurance company and your pharmaceutical company.
Yeah, and especially by promoting a food pyramid that is, engaging in chronic diseases, metabolic issues, insulin resistance, you're a multi-billion-dollar industry for the big pharma. Now you're on statins. Now you're on, blood pressure medication.
An antidepressant is going to be needed in there.
Correct.
Antihypertensive.
Yeah. And metabolic health is at the root cause of everything. So by not correcting this food pyramid, you can see why these multi-billion-dollar companies want to change the food pyramid. Look how much money that they would lose if we actually promoted food instead of sickness. that would never fly with
Yeah,
Big Pharma.
and with what we know, about health insurance companies now, how they sort of had these mid-level managers that negotiated these contracts and kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies, they essentially get paid for your medications and things that you're on as well. So like Mia said, you have a food industry that's profiting, you have a pharmaceutical industry that's profiting, you have health insurance companies profiting, and you have the privatized for-profit medical industries in our country where, on every corner you see 3 hospitals like it's Home Depot and Lowe's across the street from each other. Everybody is rolling in money while we are out here just sick and dying.
Yep.
And the thing is, these are not quick deaths, right? It's not like you eat a bowl of Cheerios and you keel over and die. You're going to eat 7,000 bowls of Cheerios over your lifetime with all of that glyphosate, no nutritional value, and you're going to slowly get more and more sick. You're going to become predisposed to these chronic conditions, these autoimmune diseases. 6 years later, there's another med. 3 years later, there's another med. And they understand this. They understand the lifetime approach to these patients.
Yeah. And no shame to your provider. I don't want to say that we're bashing the providers because we were taught this exact system. So you're just going along every single day, rolling with the punches. Oh, now you have an elevated A1C. I know what to do. Here's your metformin. See ya in 3 months. So it's things like that where like we understand because we were taught that same way. But now that we understand why we were taught this, because remember, Big Pharma actually funds majority of our education system, you can start to connect all these dots and you're like, your mind is blown. You're like, how in the world do we not think for ourselves? Do we just go along with the food pyramid as you're sitting and talking to your patient saying, this is your food pyramid that you eat. See you in 3 months when you're diabetic. And it's terrible. And it's not that they don't know any better because it's what they were taught. So I can't say that it's just like lack of education. It's just they were taught wrong by the companies that benefit.
Well, it's also hard to break out of the mold because somewhere along the way, I say this to a lot because people will say, they'll use the term trust the science. And I always say, don't trust the science, ask questions, look at where that science came from, do your own research because science can be manipulated. But somewhere along the way, trust the science, we figured out is a gaslighting term. And what trust the science really means is don't ask questions. It means be a good boy, do what you're told, and don't ask questions. Because in my line of work, in the medical world and as a physician, when you start asking questions, if you simply ask the question, like this happened to me on my own personal social media, I simply posed the idea that eating a nutrient-dense whole food diet can reduce your risk for chronic disease and autoimmune disease and potentially treat already diagnosed chronic diseases and autoimmune diseases. I specified in conjunction with pharmaceuticals and standard ways of care, and I got essentially attacked by people in the traditional Western medicine world. Show us evidence of that. Give me the studies that show that. And it's like, wait, why are you attacking me for asking a very valid question? Like, hey, do you think we could try this?
Yeah. Also, a lot of these studies are hard to find because you can't patent things that aren't in nature. So nobody's going to spend millions and billions of dollars on science when you can't patent a cucumber to tell somebody how to eat correctly. It's just not going to happen.
What food company is going to do a double-blind, placebo-controlled study on eating fresh fruit and vegetables so that you no longer buy any of their processed foods? Like Kraft's never going to do that, Nabisco, General Mills. Nobody's going to do it. So you're not going to have this data.
Yeah, and we'll wind down here on this story here, but I just wanted to give insight because once again, this happened yesterday. I had a patient, she was in her 50s, she had elevated cholesterol, and we were going over her diet and things that she eats, and she said, well, because we were talking about protein sources, and she's like, well, I love eggs, but I can't eat those anymore, and I'm like, I know where this is going. And I said, well, why can't you eat them? And she said, well, my provider said I have high cholesterol, I can't eat my 2 hard-boiled eggs every morning anymore. And I said, interesting, what did he tell you to eat before? I kid you not, it was cereal, heart healthy cereal. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I was like, please don't do that. Stick to your eggs because like you're telling me that you walked out, like for us, we live on a farm, you walking out and collecting your fresh eggs and cracking them over the pan, that's going to give you high cholesterol, not your entire process, like everything that we're talking about. This is how you become metabolically
bleaching,
dysfunctional.
refining, adding oils, and then giving you Frankenstein foods that are depleted of all nutrient value.
Yeah, not nature's, I call them butt nuggets, not nature's multivitamin butt nugget from your chicken coop. It's just, it makes such a world of difference. So, moral of the story, don't trust the science to the extent that we think. I mean, look how long this has taken. There actually hasn't even been any change on the food pyramid. And I was talking to my husband yesterday about they're finally looking into formula, baby formula. They're like, yeah, sure, we'll actually now do some studies. It took 25 years for them to say, we're going to start looking at heavy metals because majority of these formulas were testing heavy metals for babies. And then I saw that they're getting 60 grams of added sugar every single day if you're a pure formula baby. And that's not okay. That's not acceptable. So change, but it takes a while.
I agree. And I think the point of our podcast, the point of what we do, and the point of what we say to a lot of people is just to really try to introduce other ideas and concepts out there. I don't think we're on this to try to change your mind or make you see things our way, but this is how we view metabolic health. This is how we view taking care of your body, supporting your organs, and trying to live a long and healthy life. And we want to share that with you. It's not medical advice. This is an informational podcast. It's meant to be discussions, and it's really meant to encourage you to have new discussions with your providers, for you to go out and seek your own information. Find another podcast. Find people who are maybe more important or more popular than us. Read books. Go to scientific journals. The point is just don't trust what other people are telling you. Start to learn and figure it out on your own. Don't trust the science. Look at the science and see if you believe it.
Yeah. And if you look at history and start connecting the dots, things will start raising red flags like it did for me. And then, start to follow. I got interested in the blue zone people. So the people who live the most longevity lives and healthy and abundant lives. Those are people who live plant predominant. They're out all the time. They're active in social environments. Those are the people that live significantly longer than the average American. And when you study their cultures, it is not this food pyramid. I tell you that. So, bottom line, how can we fix this? Well, throw that food pyramid right out the window. Even if you've never looked at that, don't pay any attention to that. It's not about grains and things like that. So you want natural. So your grass-fed beef, your wild-caught salmon. If you use tuna, make sure it's a good brand like Safe Catch that's tested every batch.
Local butchers.
Yeah, local pharmacy.
Locally sourced meat.
Pharmacy, local farm.
Yeah.
Avoid the pharmacy.
If they have grass-fed, grass-finished, great. If not, even just local is a great step,
Back to the basics, single ingredient foods. Fill your plate with as much nutrient-dense, foods as you can. Fill it with as much vegetables, whether it's roasted, toasted, raw or steamed. Fill your plate with vegetables. Choose your protein of source. Single ingredient foods. The less man touched it, the better. And you can pretty much solve all of your problems. You don't have to think, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. Every single time you build your meal, just think, how processed did this, get to
my plate?
Hands,
yes, robots, machines touched it for it to get here.
And it does become, I promise you, it does become easier over time. Meals just become natural and
the other thing we've talked about is, people will tell us, but I crave this, I crave that. And you have to remember that your cravings are really coming from the bacteria that live in your gut. It's called your microbiome. And when you feed it the good things, when you avoid the processed foods, when it takes some time for it to turn over, but over the course of 2 and 3 months, your gut bacteria will turn over. And the bacteria that fed on Whoppers and Big Macs and potato chips will die. And the things that feed on whole, unprocessed foods and fruits and vegetables will thrive. And you will actually crave that. I'm not kidding when I say when I'm craving something sweet, an apple with peanut butter and raisins sounds 50 times, infinitely times better to me than a Snickers bar or, something.
And like he said, and we'll do an entire podcast about the gut microbiome, but he is right. The more that you kill off that bacteria, it is actually, when you're craving those things, it's actually not like you, it's your gut bacteria that's saying, hey, we need to survive. Please get your next dose of XYZ so we can live. So the more bad gut bacteria you have, the worse cravings you're going to have, which is why when people transition into a healthier, more plant predominant, less processed diet, they feel like crap. Why? Because as those bacteria are dying off, they release something called an exotoxin, and you're literally feeling their cellular death. It's wild, but I promise it does get better. The more that you stay on that journey, you don't crave any of that. He bought something from the hospital, the Samoa cookies.
Oh, yeah.
And those used to be my favorite. And I tried a bite the other day and I was like, oh my gosh, it was so fake sweet. It left a coat in my mouth. I didn't even finish it. I'm like, this was not what it used to be. I give our chickens diabetes. It was not what it used to be. And once you change your palate and your gut microbiome, you will never look back. I promise you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we're functionally medicine trained now, and our approach is to look upstream at the root cause of disease. Let's try to prevent disease before it starts. And if you do have it or it is developing in you, let's look back to what caused it. Let's change those habits and let's fix it that way. I made this comment the other day, and I'm going to start saying it more, but going to the doctor, listing off a bunch of your symptoms, receiving a diagnosis, and a prescription for a pill that's supposed to fix it is so 90s. Let's just not do that anymore. Let's change that.
Yeah.
Let's address it at home. You can be your doctor. I mean, again, I'm not advocating you don't have a primary care physician that helps you with your health, but you can do a lot of this stuff at home. Food can be medicine.
Yep. And I see it every single day. Your doctor will not be a better advocate than you will yourself. So, anything else?
Nope.
All right. Sounds good, guys. Just a reminder, this podcast is for informational purposes only, and this is not medical advice. It is not a substitute for professional care, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with your healthcare provider before making any changes to your health routine. Remember that you have the power. Join us in next week to get the knowledge.
You do have the power. You have the power to speak up for yourself. You have the power to make change, and we would like to give you the knowledge to help you do that.
Thanks, guys.